Tonight, will Donald Trump cost you money? The threat of tariffs have rattled the markets, with some due to come into effect within hours. But a month-long respite for Mexico, a 25% levy delayed after the country's president agreed to send 10,000 troops to the border. In Brussels, the EU and the UK are dreading a trade war after hints from the US president. So, is this a giant bluff or the beginning of a global tit-for-tat, from avocados to whiskey to fuel? We'll look at the goods which could soon become more expensive after tomorrow. And later on in the program, the pro-Russian paramilitary leader assassinated in broad daylight in Moscow. Plus, what a school shooting survivor said to the man who tried to kill her when she confronted him in court. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Now, the plan for tonight's programme had been to tell you how tariffs on goods from China, Mexico and Canada would come into force tomorrow morning. But things have changed a bit in the past few hours. First, a conversation between Donald Trump and the Mexican president and a promise of more soldiers at the border led to a delay of a month before any levies are imposed. Then a phone call with the Canadian Prime Minister in the past 60 minutes in an attempt to reach a deal. And here's the thing. Financial aggression is clearly the blunt instrument of choice for Donald Trump 2.0, a means of forcing countries to take his concerns seriously. And what happens if campaigns like this to boycott American goods and buy Canadian instead really take off? Or when tariffs eventually become inflationary and start affecting American businesses and consumers? Threatening to invade Greenland or to reclaim the Panama Canal may just feel like an elaborate bluff. Well, tonight, we want to sift through the rhetoric and assess the likely real-world impact. Let's get started with our first report from Canada's car capital. Here's our international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
1 minute past midnight is the deadline when the US slaps punitive tariffs on all Canadian exports, 10% on crude oil, 25% on everything else. Canadian prosperity, along with hundreds of thousands of jobs under threat, many of them here in Windsor, Canada's car capital. Around a quarter of all trade between the United States and Canada crosses that bridge, the Ambassador's Bridge. It's £260 million worth of goods every single day. A lot of them cars, car parts, many of which crisscross the border multiple times before they end up either at an assembly plant in Detroit on that side of the river or here in Windsor, Ontario, which is Canada's car capital. These are tightly integrated supply chains, hugely complicated to unpick and hugely costly if every crossing involves a tariff. Jib, who we interrupt over his lunch at a car repair workshop, is not positive about the future.
It's not easy for people, as is today, to survive out here with pay and, taxes as is. Now we're adding an extra 25%.
It looks like the worst president we've ever had on that side of the border. He's an idiot. I don't think anyone from Canada is going to pay him anything to ship their cars over there. I don't think that's...
Do you think he actually thinks that you'll become his 51st state?
I think he needs to go back to school and do a lot of research on what's reality in life.
Mexico has won an 11th hour reprieve, saying it will strengthen its northern border with an additional 10,000 troops in return for a 1-month pause in tariffs. The United States, in turn, promising to combat the flow of guns into Mexico and the hands of the cartels.
I told him that we've been working together on immigration, that there were results, always based on protection and respect for human rights. And then we talked about his interest, and ours as well, in reducing the traffic of fentanyl. But I also explained to him the seriousness of the amount of high-powered weapons that enter from the United States.
For all the noise, Canadians remain baffled as to what exactly it is that Donald Trump wants from them.
The pretext offered is the flimsiest pretext possible. Less than 1%, in fact, around 0.2% of the fentanyl that comes into the U.S. comes through the Canadian border. If border security were the issue, this could be solved in 5 minutes.
Fresh off the plane from his weekend in Mar-a-Lago, the US president lashed out at the EU, The UK getting a mention too. No alliance is sacred when it comes to America first.
They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing. And we take everything from them, millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products. So the UK is way out of line, and we'll see the UK, but European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
Taking a wrecking ball to long-standing trade ties will fray partnerships and put a strain on the global economy, both of which may end up costing the United States far more than Trump is bargaining for. Dana Magnay, Sky News in Windsor, Canada.
And we'll be speaking to Diana in a moment. But first, just how big are the trade deficits that Donald Trump says are forcing his hand with tariffs? And why does it seem, at least for now, that the UK could be off the hook? Our economics and data editor Ed Conway explains.
Let me start with a slightly provocative question. What if the UK has almost unwittingly found itself in about the best position it could be vis-a-vis Donald Trump and his tariffs, and done it basically by mistake? I know that sounds like it's slightly strange, but let me just talk you through it. And the first thing you really need to know about this is that if there's one thing Donald Trump really hates, it is trade deficits. What's a deficit? It's when your imports are much bigger than your exports. And that's certainly the case for the United States. There you can see the imports, they are much bigger than the exports. And as a result, there is that deficit. And if you break it down, so look at where are those goods actually coming from or indeed going to, look, when it comes to imports, the majority of them, pretty much half actually, when you look at this, nearly half, come from Canada, Mexico, and China. So no surprises as to whether those were the countries which we're focused on. But here's what's interesting, OK? So now look at other countries and their deficits with the US. These bars are showing you how much the deficits are with the US. Anything in this kind of pink territory means the US does have a deficit with them. So look, there's China, there's the EU, there's Mexico, and Canada is somewhere there as well. Anything in the blue means there is no deficit with the US. And these are the countries that Donald Trump is really focusing on. And here's why this matters for the UK. First of all, obviously, as we all know, the UK is no longer part of the EU. So if there were to be tariffs on the EU, that wouldn't directly affect the UK. Secondly, well, look where the UK is. It's over here. And there is, at least according to the US figures, there is no deficit with the UK. Worth saying, though, OK, so those are the US figures. If you look at the UK's kind of same version of the same statistic, actually the UK bar is a little bit further down. And in fact, it's slightly in that negative territory. But even so, it's relatively small. So Donald Trump won't be looking at the UK and saying, gosh, that deficit is too big. The other reason why the UK might well be in this good position is that while other countries around the world, including the US, Canada, India, Turkey, many other countries have already imposed extra tariffs on China, the UK so far has not. These are tariffs on electric vehicles. And so in the event of a trade negotiation, the UK could just say, look, maybe we'll actually impose those tariffs. So for all of those reasons, actually, Britain isn't in that bad a position to do a deal potentially with the US, to negotiate, or maybe to be that bridge with Europe. But of course, with Donald Trump, you really just never know.
Well, Ed Conway there. So what exactly do Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada mean? Well, he's imposed 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports into the United States. But there's been space carved out for Canadian energy, including oil, natural gas and electricity. This will be taxed at a lower 10% rate. Canada have, in response, announced a number of counter tariffs. They've matched the 25% on $155 billion worth of US goods. This means Americans could pay more for vegetables, clothing, sports equipment from Canada. The auto and lumber industry, which the US heavily relies on, is also at risk. It could put a strain on housing and car prices. Ontario, Canada's largest province by population, have also moved to pull all US alcohol from their shelves. It's a big move. Canada is the second largest market for America's spirits. Well, let's go live to our international correspondent, Diana Magnay. who's in Windsor, Ontario for us, just across the Detroit River from the United States. Diana, it's good to see you. I mean, the real sense that you get just speaking to Canadians is that there is a sense of anger and betrayal about the way in which Donald Trump is handling this situation.
Yes, I mean, this country has, for a very long time, and we hear that over and over again from the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, enjoyed a very close friendship with the United States. And as you can see, I mean, this river is the border between Canada and America, Detroit just behind me. They are very, very closely intertwined. Their trade partnership is very closely intertwined. And people can't really make head or tail of what it is that Donald Trump wants, or the fact that he is bullying Canada, essentially, for reasons that seem largely unclear. You know, is it because the US runs a trade deficit with Canada? Is it, as Donald Trump tweeted today, about the fact that he's concerned about the banking system here? He said in a tweet, Canada doesn't even allow US banks to open or do business there. Well, that's patently not the case. I've just Googled what American banks are open in Canada, and there are plenty. Is it actually because he wants Canada to become the 51st state? And you talk to people here and they just say, well, of course that's not going to happen. As you heard in that report, the man saying he's an idiot. He should go back to the history books. But it does make you wonder what it is that Justin Trudeau is actually talking to him about in the two telephone calls that the two leaders have had today, one of which we know is now over, the second, but we don't know the outcome of it. And Donald Trump was asked in the Oval Office earlier today by reporters, what is it that Canada could give you? And even he had to say he didn't know. So I think, you know, the general consensus is Canada is baffled by this assault by their next door neighbour and not really sure what to give him.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, this phone call took place about an hour ago between the two men. It's unclear what the outcome of that was. I was speaking to a Canadian a few hours ago who was waiting for that phone call to take place. And he was saying it can either go really badly or well, whatever that may now mean. And however this situation may be resolved, it may be that we see these two close trading partners and allies in a sort of trade war with each other.
Well, absolutely. But the White House has said this isn't about trade, it's about drugs. And Justin Trudeau has said, well, this is ridiculous. You know, we just, there's so little fentanyl going across that border, or illegal migrants going across that border. What is it that you want us to do? You listed there all the various tariffs that Canada is imposing of its own. And interestingly, Ontario is also doing the same thing, the province that I'm in, which stands to lose tens of thousands of jobs in the auto sector, in the agricultural sector. We're going to go and film there tomorrow. A lot of fresh produce comes in from Canada into the United States from just down the road in Leamington. There is oil and gas further north. And the governor of Ontario, Doug Ford, has announced that all US companies that have contracts ongoing in this province he is ripping up. That includes Elon Musk's Starlink. He was supposed to set up Starlink to provide Wi-Fi and internet to the more remote corners of Ontario. That contract has been ripped up. And I think the terminology is pretty interesting that Doug Ford uses. Ontario won't do business with people hell-bent on destroying our economy. Canada didn't start this fight with the US, but you better believe that we're ready to win it. I think, you know, that is fighting talk. But if these tariffs do come into effect, Canada is preparing itself for a recession. It is preparing itself for hundreds of thousands of job losses. And it is going to be a really very bleak few years if Donald Trump insists on keeping these tariffs in place. And similarly, even Donald Trump himself has admitted that you may see temporary inflation in the United States too, that those import costs are going to be passed on to the consumer, even if he says to his base that that will only be temporary.
Diana, thank you so much for all of your analysis there. So who are the other countries involved in what could become a global trade war? Well, Donald Trump had imposed 25% tariffs on all imports from Mexico. But as you heard earlier, that's been paused for 1 month. It could have put a real strain on a range of items, including fresh fruits and vegetables. Avocados in particular, Mexico supplied 90% of them for the US last year. But there's also been fresh tariffs on China, an extra 10% on all imports. Meanwhile, there haven't been any tariffs announced on the EU yet. However, speaking overnight on his return to Washington from Florida, Mr. Trump said that it'll definitely happen. But there's been no confirmation yet about any plans to impose tariffs on goods from the UK. Well, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been forced to walk a tightrope between the US and the EU as he met leaders in Brussels, insisting that there was no either or choice. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
Old allies clearly pleased to see each other in these uncertain times. Gathering to talk about European security, this informal summit was long planned, but now it has a new sense of urgency as Trump threatens leaders here in Brussels with a trade war. Into this, the British Prime Minister at NATO HQ for talks with the Defence Alliance chief.
First one in Brussels, yeah, literally got it this morning.
This grip and grasp part of a wider reset of EU-UK relations as the old post-war alliances between the US and Europe come under strain. President Trump presses for peace, this pair pressing for more allied support.
Peace will come through strength, and we must do all that we can to support Ukraine's defence.
Be it from forcing Ukraine to the negotiating table to threatening trade wars with allies, isn't it the truth that President Trump is a bad thing for Europe's economic prosperity and security?
On the question, firstly, of tariffs, obviously it's early days, and I think what's really important is open and strong trading relations, and that's been the basis of my discussions with President Trump. I do think it's right for us to acknowledge the role that the US have played in relation to the joint effort on Ukraine, and that's, of course, pivotal. Look, in relation to the relationship between the UK and the US and the EU, I've always been clear that both are important to us. We are not choosing between them, but that's historically been the position of the UK for many, many decades now.
The Prime Minister's going straight from here to an EU dinner with 27 fellow leaders. A British Prime Minister hasn't done such a thing since Brexit, so the symbolism of it all is clear. He wants to reset relations, but all of it is overshadowed by growing tensions between Brussels and Washington. And what that means for London, well, that's really unclear. The PM greeted by the European Council President as he's invited back into the club for one night only. Starmer hopes he can forge closer trading and security ties with Europe after a bumpy Brexit, while still keeping President Trump on side. The PM insists he won't pick between the UK's closest allies, but that could prove much easier said than done. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Brussels.
Joining me now from Palm Beach in Florida is Wilbur Ross, who served as US Commerce Secretary during Donald Trump's first term. Mr. Ross, thank you very much for joining me here on the programme. Of course, you were instrumental in assisting Donald Trump in imposing steel tariffs when he was first in power in 2017 through till 2020. But I just want you to react to the way that you're seeing him target Canada and Mexico and to some extent China at the moment with these tariffs?
Well, I think that those are three different questions. The president of Mexico has clearly shown that she's willing to cooperate with President Trump's request. She's already announced 10,000 troops of Mexican army will be going to the border to help control the flow of illegal immigrants. And she's talking about new measures on fentanyl. So she seems to understand pretty clearly what it is he wants. And that's why he agreed, in my view, to postpone the tariff for another 30 days so they can work out the details. You contrast that with Canada, which seems to be wanting to make this into a big fight rather than try to figure out what they can do.
Well, what can they, I mean, when you say try and figure out what they can do, what is it exactly that Donald Trump is asking from Canada? Because he's had 2 phone conversations with Justin Trudeau, and it doesn't seem, when you speak to the Canadians, that they're quite sure what it is exactly that Donald Trump wants from them.
Well, President Trump historically has wanted Canada to step up its contributions to defense. As you know, Canada is part of NATO. They are not making their 2% amount.
So are you now saying this is about NATO? Because Donald Trump hasn't really...
Please let me finish.
Okay.
He historically has been concerned about that. And more recently, he has emphasized publicly that he wants them to do something about the border and something about fentanyl. And as far as I can tell, Mr. Trudeau has not said he's prepared to do anything. All he says is, well, the problem with our border is not as bad as the problem with Mexico. Well,
but
that's
do you
true.
think he has a point when he says that you know, that the kind of drugs and the illegal immigrants that you see pouring in from the Mexican border is certainly not the same sort of problem that you're seeing coming in from the Canadian border?
Not yet, but assuming that the Mexican border gets to be closed, more closed both for immigration and fentanyl, there's very little doubt the next place they'll try to use to send them in would be Canada. So this, I think, is an anticipatory request to keep it low, try to make it even lower than it is, and set in place protection so that it won't get to be bad like Mexico is.
Well, I mean, economists have said that this could drive Canada into recession within 5 months if these tariffs hold and if they go into effect. Do you think? I mean, you were part of the team that tried to prevent and convince Donald Trump from exiting NAFTA, for example. Do you think this is the right way to handle one of your closest neighbors, trading partners, an ally that says it has fought shoulder to shoulder with the United States when it has come to different wars? I mean, various different presidents have tried to put all sorts of trade agreements over decades together with Canada, and he is seemingly now tearing it down.
Well, first of all, in the case of NAFTA, my suggestion to him was simply not to tear up NAFTA before negotiations. It was not a defense of NAFTA. And in fact, I think the USMCA made a lot of progress over NAFTA. So that was really just about a question of negotiation strategy. I didn't think there was any reason to blow up the old agreement prior to trying to negotiate the new one. And that's what came to pass. But I do think that for Canada simply to be saying, well, we don't know what he wants, so we're going to make retaliation even before his tariffs perhaps go into effect, makes no sense. I think they would do better to try to figure out how they can accommodate his request. And since neither the border nor fentanyl is such a huge problem, I don't see why it's a big deal for Canada to make some steps.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Ross, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. We've got lots more coming up after the break. Is the world's biggest single aid donor no more? We'll look at the apparent shutdown of USAID.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now. It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armory. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of hits. Still, we were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. Well, while some of the world's biggest economies grapple with Trump's tariffs, the poorest countries face losing the world's largest single donor. The US Agency for International Development, known as USAID, is to be shut down. That's according to Elon Musk. The billionaire, who's been tasked with slashing government spending, made the announcement earlier today, and the White House press secretary reiterated the administration's stand tonight. Have a listen.
If you look at the waste and abuse that has run through USAID over the past several years, these are some of the insane priorities that organization has been spending money on. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru, I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government.
The White House press secretary there. Well, let's go straight to our James Matthews, who's outside the USAID headquarters in Washington. James, I mean, no secret there, just listening to Donald Trump's press secretary. It feels like listening to Donald Trump himself, obviously, because, I mean, he's been a long-term critic of overseas spending. And this department, this agency, represents exactly what he has said that he wants to get rid of.
That's right, Yalda. Yeah, I mean, President Trump clearly doesn't like this. Presidents before him have very much embraced USAID, the concept of it. And, you know, it was described as crap by the White House press secretary. I can tell you many here beg to differ, certainly the employees inside this organization that was created in 1961 by President Kennedy. Workers here, 10,000 of them, were told in an email over the weekend, don't come into work on Monday because this is being scrapped. They've been told that by Elon Musk, who says he has the authority of President Trump. Musk, he did it in rather charmless fashion, posting on X. He said, we spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. Could gone to some great parties, did that instead. And Donald Trump has followed up by calling USAID a good concept, but has radical left lunatics. They don't see the value in this. They see it, Team Trump, as political and not aligned with their politics. Those who support USAID, they say, look, this is of extreme value to the United States, a humanitarian arm that helps people around the world, that wins America friends around the world, and also allows America to keep its eye on enemies in dark corners of the planet. So that's where we are right now, Yalda. I suspect this will end up in the courts. The lawyers backing some of the protesters who were here today, they say, look, it doesn't matter about the argument of whether it's good or bad. What matters in court will be the argument that this was created, authorized, funded by Congress. Congress set it up, and only Congress can do away with it, not the president at the stroke of a pen.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just talk about those demonstrators who have been there all day, as you say. And I just wanted to get to that point of, you know, Donald Trump can say that I want to shut this down, or Elon Musk can say I want to shut this down. But ultimately, it is going to be something, a battle that is going to be fought in the courts.
Yeah, and it will be a test, Yalda, of the strength of the courts in the face of radical reform. It will be a struggle all the way to the Supreme Court, no doubt, in the coming weeks and months. I was interested today to see the crowds that had gathered here, something like a couple of hundred of them. I mean, we haven't actually seen much street protest since Donald Trump took over and started this business of everyday executive orders, which clearly have caused consternation in a large part of the population, supported, of course, by others who voted for Donald Trump, who promised them what they would get. But yeah, protest here. It's quite surprising, I think, for many that they haven't seen that kind of rising up of the people who are unhappy. There was a gathering here because some congressmen turned up. You know, workers had been turned away. The congressmen turned up. You know, they were all angry, not just at what's happening here, but at the flurry of change. Inspectors General being sacked, a purge in the FBI, resignations at the Treasury after Elon Musk demanded access to the payment system. It is all going on, and it is all causing grief for those who don't like it. One of them was here today, a Congressman, Donald Byer. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The leadership here had told all employees to stay home, lock down the building, shut off the access to their emails and to their HR systems. And we had to come together, as many Democrats from the House and Senate as we could, just to say no. Elon Musk was not elected, didn't even come here legally. No one gave him a mandate to start shutting down government agencies founded by Congress, funded by Congress, and signed off by many different American presidents.
Where does this go? To the courts?
Yeah, we'll go to the courts next, absolutely.
There you go, Yalda, just a sense of the backlash against the early days of Trump 2.0. How big that backlash becomes, we'll find out in due course.
James, thank you so much for that update there. Well, let's speak now to Abby Maxman, who is President and Chief Executive of Oxfam America. Thank you very much, Abby, for joining us here on the programme. So we're seeing those protesters outside the headquarters of USAID. We're also hearing the White House press secretary describe the entire agency as rubbish. Just your take on everything that we're seeing unfold here, because on the one hand, I mean, it doesn't come as a total surprise that Donald Trump has opted to do this.
Well, what really it is a cruel political power play that's harming those who are least responsible and whose work depends on the support of the U.S. Agency for International Development and all of its partners around the world. This is an agency that has been established since 1961, supports and engages with a number of organizations doing humanitarian relief and development everywhere in all of the world's greatest crises, from Syria to Ethiopia to the Democratic Republic of Congo. What has been happening over the past week has been entirely upending. It's hurting and harming vulnerable people, and it's a cruel and unfortunate turn of events that throws away a huge amount of experience, expertise, and harms people and children everywhere.
Well, Elon Musk has said that it's a criminal organization. It's time for it to die. And Donald Trump has said it's run by a bunch of radical lunatics, and that the concept he understands, but in its current format, I mean, they've just described it as being inefficient and corrupt. Would you say that there is a lot of waste within the organization as well?
I think that the international humanitarian and development ecosystem does important, critical, vital, life-saving work, from people in the Democratic Republic of Congo offering water, sanitation, health, hygiene, and people who are living through conflict and displacement. It is a terrible exaggeration to take this wrecking ball to a system that has been serving the good of the people around the world for decades. What's happening is a political power play, and it's cruel, and it's hurting children, women, families in countries that deserve better.
It's also being used as a sort of tool of soft power, American soft power globally. What sort of message do you think that this now sends? I mean, obviously, it's not going to be very easy, just shutting it down. It will go to the courts. But the overall message that this now sends, that the fact that it is under threat.
Well, it's a tragedy, in my view, that it's under threat. It does incredible work helping people, saving lives, providing much needed humanitarian assistance to people who need it most. If I think of what's happening in Syria, now is the time for organizations to collaborate and step up to help the Syrian people who are living through sustained emergency humanitarian crises at a time when they can develop and start and on their own footing. And this is pulling the rug out, taking a wrecking ball, two different things happening at the same time that is harming global development, global stability, peace, and security. It certainly makes the United States an unreliable partner to many who have counted on us to be a reliable partner in the U.S. government, and for those of us who work in the nonprofit sector, providing life-saving support to people who need it most.
Abby, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Okay, we've just got some breaking news that's come in. We were speaking earlier to our correspondent Diana Magnay about that phone call between Donald Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. We were waiting for some more information to come out. We now have a statement that has come in from the Canadian Prime Minister. He said, "I just had a good call with President Trump. Canada is implementing our $1.3 billion border plan, reinforcing the border with new choppers, technology and personnel, enhanced coordination with our American partners, and increased resources to stop the flow of fentanyl. Nearly 10,000 frontline personnel are and will be working on protecting the border." Mr. Trudeau goes on to say, in addition, Canada is making new commitments to appoint a fentanyl czar, and we will list cartels as terrorists, ensure 24/7 eyes on the border, launch a Canada-US joint strike force to combat organised crime, fentanyl and money laundering. I've also signed a new intelligence directive on organised crime and fentanyl and will be backing it with $200 million. The proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days while we work together. So quite a similar approach to the Mexicans. The Mexican president earlier in a phone call with President Trump has asked for a pause of 30 days. And it seems that Justin Trudeau has done the same thing and at the same time has issued this statement to say that they are going to implement their $1.3 billion border plan, which includes choppers, technology, personnel, as well as 10,000 frontline personnel, which is exactly what Mexico has also proposed, 10,000 frontline personnel that Donald Trump confirmed in a press conference earlier. So we're seeing this really fast-paced situation developing quite quickly after Donald Trump threatened both Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs, which were supposed to come into effect tomorrow, just in the next few hours. But both Canada and Mexico now say those proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days whilst both countries work alongside the United States to come up with a longer-term solution. Well, this is The World. With me, Yalda Hakim. We've got lots more coming up. A pro-Russian paramilitary leader is killed in Moscow in what's being described as an assassination.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Welcome back. It has all the hallmarks of previous high-profile killings among Ukraine's enemies, in places where targets felt were safe. An explosion in an upscale residential block in Moscow has killed Armen Sarkisyan, the founder of a battalion fighting against Kiev's forces in eastern Ukraine. Here's our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett.
It was clearly a powerful explosion. Videos of the aftermath show a scene of devastation, glass and brickwork everywhere. The bomb reportedly went off in the lobby of this luxury apartment block. Among the dead, Armen Sarkisyan, a pro-Russian paramilitary leader from eastern Ukraine. In the past, Kiev's accused him of helping Moscow's forces on the battlefield. Russian state media has called this an assassination.
When you see such horror, naturally, you don't look at anything. The emergency services said run, and of course everyone ran out.
Outside, the atmosphere was tense. The authorities on high alert. Well, this is becoming an increasingly common sight here in Moscow. The emergency services dealing with the aftermath of an explosion in the suburbs of the Russian capital. This is the third in the last 6 months. And the question is, was it because of the war in Ukraine? The last one was. Kiev took credit for a bomb that killed a top Russian general outside his apartment block in December. And last summer, another military officer was injured in a car bomb that was blamed on Ukraine. No comment yet from Kiev this time around. But either way, it's not a good look for the Kremlin, which said the special services are now doing their job. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
Now, from lying wounded and bleeding on the floor of her classroom to facing a high school mass shooter in court. It's the harrowing journey of Parkland survivor Sam Fuentes, captured in the Oscar-nominated short documentary Death by Numbers. 17 people, mostly students, were killed in 2018 when gunman Nicolas Cruz opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle.
I haven't cried yet. I'm not, upset. I just don't really feel a lot of anything right now. It's like being in the eye of the hurricane, when you can single-handedly stare your friend's killer in the face and tell them exactly how it happened, when it happened, and not be fazed by that. They want you to be afraid. They want you to look at them like they're gods, like they're overlords, that in any minute they can end anything. But that's just not the case anymore. And all that we can do is deal with the repercussions.
Well, Sam Fuentes is here with me, along with the film's director and producer, Kim Snyder. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Sam, I'm going to begin with you because, the idea of what you went through is just absolutely terrifying. Just talk us through having to almost relive it for the film.
Absolutely. At times, of course, just revisiting my own trauma can be really tough. But I knew that in the trial and in confronting my shooter, there was a larger stake at hand, which was this idea of revealing the truth of the sort of hatred that I think he symbolized in the world, but also to uphold the legacy of everybody that we had lost as a result of that horrendous day. And so a lot of my strength, even though I was so frightened to the bone to even see him again, it weighed heavily to me to be able to do this for something that was far larger than myself.
Has it, on some level, healed your trauma?
Yeah, I think confronting him, putting it into words, working through my trauma in a very literal and physical way has been a source of empowerment for me because I've been able to gain some sense of control.
It's Kim, you've made these sorts of films before. I mean, what sort of thing do you find connects a lot of these stories? Because, of course, each of the incidents and the devastating situation that happens is so individual. But is there something that connects them as well?
It is a great question. I think there is a playbook now of seeing these communities and the effects of gun violence. I think certain effects of PTSD that I guess I've come to learn a lot in collaborating with Sam, and even before that, how to be around trauma. And so it was truly a collaborative kind of effort to make sure that the film was, in fact, healing and more than not. And so that's what we knew there was a sort of higher purpose to shed light on youth trauma. And as Sam said, I think it transcends the gun issue, which has its own specific horrendous markings in the States. But I think it's a larger issue about standing up to hate right now and accountability. And she's so brave and courageous in how she does it.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it brings, you have to sort of admire and be in awe of the sort of bravery that someone like Sam has showed to almost relive that process. And I guess for you as a filmmaker, sensitively sort of working around that as well.
Yes, and I have seen a sort of commonality of a tremendous strength. I mean, there are cliches we hear in life about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And of course, no one would ever want anyone to go through this, but you see this tremendous strength that is so inspiring when people do get up. It really, everything about Sam and what we depict in the film defines resilience and that part of the human spirit.
Sam, why did you feel you needed to do this film? I mean, you talked about honouring those who were lost as well, but on top of that, I guess, was it something to do with, you know, shedding light on the issue and also others who have gone through what you've gone through and survived?
One thing, or actually two things that I learned to be true is that this sort of trauma and this sort of loss is a feeling that is so isolating and alienating, and you almost don't know how to make sense of the world as a result of going through such loss. And I know that in itself was a very relatable feeling, and upholding the legacy and really gaining your strength from a place that is really scary, I think at times can be the most empowering thing, is when you've hit rock bottom, the only thing left to do is to look up and to hope for more. But also I wanted to tell a story that was incredibly personal and intimate to me. And I wanted to reveal the truth that, unfortunately, what happened at my high school was not a unique situation, and the kind of shooter that I knew him to be is not a unique individual, that he belongs to a larger framework of a collective of hate, really. And so revealing that truth and was so important to me, because I wanted people to know that, like, even when you've had everything taken from you, you still have the ability to stand up for what is right and what is just. And in a trial that was really cruel and unusual, this was the only thing I had left to do.
And just briefly, we're just running out of time, but what was it like confronting your shooter?
Oh, I was so petrified. I was so incredibly scared. I have no idea how I was able to contain all of it, but I think because I knew it was larger than myself, that's what gave me the bravery to do it. And I'm really glad that I did, because I think I might have some regrets if I let that open for the rest of my life.
And Kim, what do you hope that people take away from this film, but other films that you have made that are in line with this?
Well, first off, I think the lived experience, the fact that Sam wrote this, that it came from her words and from a gun violence survivor herself, is really important in storytelling, that people who have this lived experience collaborate. And I think the larger issue is this idea of accountability and standing up to hate. I love that Sam is able to own and move through anger and trauma and get to a place that inspires hope.
Kim, Sam, thank you both for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Well, that's it from me and the team here on the programme. I'm just going to briefly bring you up to date on the updates that we got from Prime Minister Trudeau. He has said that he's had a phone call with President Trump and that Canada is now implementing their $1.3 billion border plan. Those tariffs that were planned are now on hold for 30 days. I'll be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. Good night for now.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics